U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Keep your hands where I can see them.
What is happening?
For nearly a decade, Tariq Jolibois Beauchamp was celebrated as a face of Florida wildlife conservation. 187,000 followers, a state commendation, and viral videos of animals he claimed to release. What you are about to see destroys that reputation forever.
I run a permitted wildlife rehabilitation facility. $284,000 from selling 78 protected and endangered animals over 3 years.
87 animals, 2 ledgers, 1 hand. For 4 years, every monthly disposition report Tariq Anwar Jolibois Beauchamp filed with the state of Florida was a lie, and the truth was sitting in a black 3-ring binder 12 feet away in the same home office. $284,000 in unreported income from the sale of federally protected wildlife, eastern indigo snakes, gopher tortoises, American kestrels, red-shouldered hawks, animals that had walked, slithered, or flown into his rehabilitation facility under a state permit and never left it the way the state of Florida was told they did. By the time U.S. Fish and Wildlife agents finished cataloging what they found in his home office, the man with 187,000 Instagram followers was facing federal charges that could put him in prison for more than 5 years. Before we get into how this one came apart, I want to know something. If you saw a man on Instagram releasing a rehabilitated owl in front of a group of kids, would it ever cross your mind that the next owl in that same enclosure might be sold to a private collector for $4,000? Drop a comment and tell me, did you trust the people in these rescue videos? And if you're not subscribed yet, this is the channel where we take apart exactly how trusted insiders use that trust as cover. Subscribe now. We do one of these every week. Tariq Anwar Jolibois Beauchamp was born in Miami in 1981, the middle of 3 boys, to a Haitian-American father who ran a small import business in Little Haiti, and a Lebanese-American mother who taught 4th grade at a public school in North Miami. The household ran in 3 languages: Creole at his grandmother's dinner table, Arabic on the phone with his mother's cousins in Dearborn, and English everywhere else. Money was steady, but never excessive. His father drove the same 1994 Ford Econoline van for 16 years. The animals started early. Family members remember Tariq at 7 years old, keeping a shoebox of anoles in his bedroom, feeding them with tweezers, getting in trouble when his mother found a black racer snake in a pillowcase under his bed. By 11, he was the kid the neighbors called when they found something injured in the yard. By 13, he was volunteering on Saturdays at a small wildlife rescue in Homestead, mucking out enclosures and cleaning syringes for pocket money and the chance to be near hawks. He graduated from Miami Killian Senior High in 1999, went to the University of Florida in Gainesville, and majored in wildlife ecology and conservation. His professors remember him as serious, quiet, and obsessive about reptiles. He wrote his senior thesis on the home range of the eastern indigo snake in scrub habitat in Highlands County, the same federally threatened species he would eventually traffic for between $3,500 and $8,000 an animal. He graduated in 2004. The first decade of his career was unremarkable in the way that careers in this field usually are. He worked as a seasonal field technician for a state contractor doing gopher tortoise relocations. He worked at a private reptile breeder in Ocala for 18 months and learned what collectors actually paid for. He spent 4 years at a small accredited wildlife rehab in St. Lucie County, lived in a converted garage apartment, and made about $31,000 a year. He met his wife, Adelisa, at a Herpetological Society meeting in Orlando in 2010. They married in 2012. Their first daughter was born in 2013. In 2015, the family moved north, 12 acres of dry rural land near Lake Wales, in Polk County, purchased for $148,000 with a mortgage co-signed by his father-in-law. The plan, as he wrote on his FWC permit application the following spring, was to build a Class 3 native wildlife rehabilitation facility with a specialty in raptors, reptiles, and small mammals. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission approved his permit in March of 2016. The USDA APHIS captive wildlife exhibitor license followed 4 months later. Heart of Florida Wildlife Rehab opened on the property in the summer of 2016. The first year, by his own intake records, he took in 211 animals, most of them songbirds and box turtles, a handful of hawks, 3 indigo snakes that had been hit by vehicles on State Road 60. Adelisa kept the books. The 2 oldest kids fed the songbirds before school. The 3rd child was born in 2017. By 2018, the facility had a paid part-time assistant and a rotating bench of about a dozen volunteers from the Lake Wales community. His FWC site inspections came back clean every quarter. The performance language in his agency file from those years was specific and warm. Meticulous record-keeping, strong community outreach, appropriate husbandry across all permitted species. In 2019, the Commission gave him a formal commendation for his work releasing rehabilitated red-shouldered hawks back into intact scrub habitat. Local press wrote about him. The Lakeland Ledger ran a profile under the headline, "The Quiet Steward of Polk County Wildlife." He was, by every external measure, exactly who he appeared to be. The 2019 commendation hung framed on the wall of the same home office, where by that point, he had already started keeping the second ledger. To understand what he did, you have to understand the architecture he was operating inside, because the architecture is what made it possible. In Florida, a Class 3 wildlife rehabilitation permit is issued by the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. The permit authorizes a private citizen to take possession of injured, orphaned, or otherwise distressed native wildlife, including federally protected species, for the explicit and narrow purpose of returning that animal to the wild. The permit holder is not the owner of the animal. Title to a protected wild animal in the United States does not pass to a private party. The rehabilitator is, in legal terms, a temporary custodian of an animal that belongs to the public, held in trust by the state and federal governments. That custodial relationship is governed by paperwork. Every animal that comes into a permitted facility must be logged on intake: date, species, location found, condition, presumed cause of injury, name of person who delivered it. Every animal that leaves must be logged on disposition: released, transferred to long-term sanctuary care, transferred to another permitted facility, or humanely euthanized in accordance with Endangered Species Act and Migratory Bird Treaty Act compliance. Those records are compiled into a monthly disposition report and filed with the FWC. The agency does not, as a routine matter, send an inspector to the property the day each animal is released. The agency does not, as a routine matter, verify GPS tag activation logs against satellite data. The agency does not, as a routine matter, demand video proof that a euthanized animal was actually euthanized. The system depends, almost entirely, on the accuracy of what the permit holder writes down and submits. This is not, by itself, a stupid system. It is a system designed for the kind of person Tariq Jolibois-Beauchamp appeared to be. A serious, mission-driven rehabilitator who got into this work because he loved hawks at 13 years old. The system trusts the permit holder because the permit holder, in nearly every other case in Florida, is precisely the kind of person who has no economic incentive to lie. Rehab work doesn't pay. Most permit holders subsidize their facilities out of pocket. The system was not designed to defend against someone who looked the part on Instagram and was running a parallel business out of the back of the same enclosure. The vulnerability sat in the gap between intake and disposition. An eastern indigo snake brought in for rehabilitation is, on paper, indistinguishable from an eastern indigo snake the rehabilitator has personally collected from a roadside scrub lot the night before without a separate state collection permit. Both can be logged. Both can be photographed. Both can be assigned a disposition. The only person who knows which is the rehabilitator. And the only document that records the truth is the one he keeps in his own handwriting in his own office. That document, in his case, became two documents. One he submitted to the state of Florida. The other he kept in a black binder on the second shelf of the bookcase behind his desk. The first documented illegal sale, according to the federal indictment, was on September 7, 2021. The animal was a juvenile eastern indigo snake that had come into the facility 4 months earlier with a healed laceration along its mid-body, found by an FWC officer on County Road 630. The intake form is in the file. The rehabilitation log shows weight gain, normal shed cycles, and a release recommendation from a consulting veterinarian dated August 29th. The FWC monthly disposition report for September 2021 says the snake was released on September 7th into protected scrub habitat in Highlands County, with a passive integrated transponder tag activated and last detected on September 11th, presumed established. The ledger in the black binder, in his own handwriting, for September 7th, 2021 says, Indigo, Juve, sold, TX collector via Expo intro, 3,500 cash, picked up at facility 7 p.m. For the next 3 years, this pattern repeated 77 more times. Not every animal in the facility, not even most of them. The vast majority of intake animals were rehabilitated and released exactly as documented. The public release videos on Instagram were real. The school visits were real. The gopher tortoise that went viral in a TikTok clip with 2 million views in 2022 was actually released onto a conservation easement in DeSoto County. He was a real rehabilitator. He was also something else. The selection was deliberate. From the federal investigation, he chose animals based on what collectors were currently asking for and on what would be easiest to misreport. A federally threatened indigo snake that had come in as an adult and could not be reliably pity tagged was easier to log as released tag failed than a clean release. A gopher tortoise hatchling that had been transferred to long-term care was easier to log as transferred to private sanctuary with no follow-up than to actually transfer. A red-shouldered hawk that had failed flight evaluation could be logged humanely euthanized due to non-rehabilitable injury without anyone asking for a carcass. The coded vocabulary in his Instagram DMs, recovered later from the device, was unsubtle once you knew what to look for. Looking for a green one meant an indigo snake. Brown shells meant tortoises. Daytime flyers meant the diurnal raptors, kestrels, and hawks. Prices were never quoted in DMs. The price quote happened by phone or in person at the Central Florida Exotic Pet Expos he attended 4 to 6 times a year, the Tampa Reptile Expo in May and October, the Daytona Reptile Breeders Expo in August, smaller swap meets in Lakeland and Polk City. Payments came in 4 ways: Cash App and Zelle for buyers who were willing to leave a digital fingerprint and trusted that the description field would say something harmless; Bitcoin, increasingly after 2022, for buyers who didn't; cash, in vacuum-sealed envelopes, at the expos and at the rare facility pickups. Across the 78 transactions, the federal forensic accountants would eventually total it at $284,000 over 39 months. The money went where money tends to go in households that suddenly have more of it. $84,000 in private school tuition over the period for the 2 oldest kids, who moved from public school in Lake Wales to a small private day school in Lakeland in 2022. A 2023 Toyota Tundra, purchased outright for $58,000, with the trade-in of his old work truck barely covering taxes and tags. $42,000 in additional facility infrastructure, a new outdoor flight cage, an upgraded reptile room, HVAC, a larger generator. Roughly $100,000 absorbed into incremental household consumption, vacations, restaurants, a kitchen renovation Adelisa had been asking about for 3 years. The paradox of the facility expansion is what investigators kept circling back to in interviews. He was using money from selling rehabilitation animals to expand the rehabilitation facility that was both the source of the animals and the cover for their sale. The legitimate operation grew because the illegitimate one paid for it. The Instagram following grew. The school visits grew. The 2023 release video of a rehabilitated barred owl, filmed with a class of 4th graders watching, hit 800,000 views. He paid no taxes on the $284,000. None of it appeared on the joint return he filed with Adelisa. The household's apparent W-2 income, between her part-time bookkeeping work and his modest exhibitor revenue, would not have supported the lifestyle the family was visibly living. No one, not the IRS, not the FWC, not a single colleague in the Central Florida rehabilitation community, appears to have asked. Quick pause. I want you to think about this carefully, because the next part is what makes this case different from 1,000 other federal wildlife cases. He wasn't hiding the money very well. The Tundra was in the driveway, the kids were in private school, the kitchen was renovated, and nobody asked. If you've ever wondered why these cases run for years before anyone notices, leave a comment and tell me where you think the failure was. Was it the agency, the neighbors, the buyers, or all three? And subscribe if you haven't yet. We follow these things all the way through to sentencing. The investigation that ended Tariq Jolibois Beauchamp's career did not begin with him. It began in early 2023 with a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Office of Law Enforcement file labeled Operation Spotted Tortoise, a multi-jurisdictional effort targeting the broader Florida-to-collector pipeline of trafficked native reptiles, opened after an unrelated arrest in Texas turned up a stolen indigo snake that had originated somehow from a permitted Florida facility. USFWS special agents, working with FWC investigators and the FBI Tampa field office, spent most of 2023 doing what these investigations always do, mapping the buyer side of the network, subpoenaed PayPal records, cooperating witness debriefs, months of metadata pulls from Instagram and Telegram. By early 2024, they had a list of approximately 15 Florida area sellers who appeared to be moving animals into the network, and one of those names, surfaced through a coded DM thread on a buyer's seized phone in Oklahoma, was the handle, Heart of Florida Wildlife. In July 2024, an undercover USFWS special agent, using a backstopped identity, a clean Instagram profile, and a 6-month-old history of innocuous reptile collector activity, sent the first DM. The message asked about a green one, adult, prefer something local. The response came back from a Heart of Florida Wildlife within 4 hours. Got 2 coming available. DM me a number. The conversation moved from Instagram to Signal 3 messages later. Over the following 9 weeks, the agent and Jolibois Beauchamp negotiated the sale of 2 adult eastern indigo snakes for $14,000, payable in Bitcoin to a wallet address he provided. The delivery was to be made on October 11, 2024, in the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel restaurant off Interstate 4 on the east side of Tampa. The animals would be in a soft-sided black pet carrier. He would arrive between 6:15 and 6:30 in the evening. He would be in a white 2023 Toyota Tundra. He arrived at 6:22 p.m. He was driving the truck described. He had 2 adult eastern indigo snakes in the carrier described. The agent confirmed the species, confirmed the payment had cleared the Bitcoin address, and accepted the delivery. The handoff was on body cam from a second agent in a parked vehicle 30 feet away. Jolibois Beauchamp drove back to Lake Wales that night and, according to the ledger seized 2 months later, logged the transaction the same way he had logged the 77 before it. For 64 days after the Cracker Barrel handoff, nothing visibly happened. He continued to post release videos. He attended the November Tampa Reptile Expo and made, by the ledger seized later, 3 more cash sales totaling $16,400. He filed his October monthly disposition report with the FWC on November 5th. The report contained 2 new entries listing eastern indigo snakes as released, pit tag activated 10/11/2024, last detected 10/15/2024, presumed established. The entries were submitted 4 days after the snakes had been handed off in a Cracker Barrel parking lot to a federal agent. The search warrants were executed at 6:50 a.m. on the morning of December 14th, 2024. 2 parallel teams, one at the Lake Wales facility, one at the residence 3/4 of a mile away on the same property, moved in simultaneously. USFWS, FWC, FBI Tampa, and a USDA AFRIS inspector. Adelisa and the children were home. The kids were 11, 8, and 7. Tariq was already awake. He had been doing morning feedings in the Songbird aviary when the first vehicles came up the gravel drive. What the searchers found, across the two locations, made the case essentially over before the indictment was even drafted. In the facility, 47 protected and endangered specimens housed in enclosures that did not appear in current rehabilitation intake documentation. 11 indigo snakes, 9 gopher tortoises, 4 kestrels, 3 red-shouldered hawks, 20 other specimens across various other protected species. Some had been at the facility for months. None of them had paperwork. In the home office, the desktop computer, 2 external hard drives, 3 cell phones, and the black 3-ring binder. Inside the binder, in his own handwriting, on lined paper, were entries dating back to September 2021. 87 entries across 4 years, each one keyed to a date that matched a date on a submitted FWC monthly disposition report, each one describing what had actually happened to the animal on that date. Buyer initials, state or country, method of payment, dollar amount, pickup location. In the office desk drawer, a second laptop with an encrypted Signal account showing message threads with 23 buyers across 11 states and 3 countries, Germany, the Netherlands, and Japan. Financial records on the desktop showed Cash App and Zelle deposits totaling $142,000 across the period, separate from the Bitcoin wallet that contained the rest. The smoking gun was the side-by-side. Investigators laid the seized binder on a conference table at the USFWS Lakeland resident office that afternoon and pulled the corresponding FWC monthly disposition reports from the agency portal. They began at the top, November 18th, 2022. The FWC report read, verbatim, Eastern indigo snake released to wild, pit tag activated 11/18/2022, last detected 11/22/2022, presumed established. The binder, in the same handwriting that had signed the FWC report, read, 11/18, sold, OK collector, 5,500 cash, picked up at facility. They did the same comparison for 86 more entries. 87 of 87 matched a falsified state report. The dishonest record was the one filed with the state of Florida. The confrontation happened on the front porch of the residence at 7:11 a.m. on December 14th, 41 minutes into the search. He had been brought from the Songbird aviary by 2 FWC officers and asked to sit at the porch table while the special agent in charge from USFWS came up from the facility. The conversation that followed was recorded on the agent's body camera. He was not under arrest. He was Mirandized as a precaution. He agreed to speak without an attorney present. Special Agent Reyes. Tariq, we recovered a binder from your office. I want to talk to you about what's in it. Jolibois Beauchamp. Okay. Reyes. There's an entry in there dated November 18th, 2022. It says you sold an indigo snake for $5,500. Your FWC report for that same date says that snake was released. Can you help me understand that? Jolibois Beauchamp. Pause, approximately 8 seconds. I don't have a good answer for you on that. Reyes. There are 87 entries like it. Jolibois Beauchamp. Long pause. Yeah. Reyes. You knew the reports you were filing were false. Jolibois Beauchamp. I knew. Reyes. How long have you been doing this? Jolibois Beauchamp. The first one was in 2021, September. The tuition came due, and the boy was already enrolled, and I had a guy who would pay, and I thought it was one time. Reyes. And then? Jolibois Beauchamp. Pause. And then it kept being easy. He asked for a lawyer 90 seconds after that exchange. He was not arrested that morning. The indictment came down 4 months later in the Middle District of Florida on April 14th, 2025. The federal grand jury returned an 11-count indictment. The lead counts were Lacey Act trafficking violations under 16 U.S.C. Section 3372. the federal hammer in cases like this, because the Lacey Act criminalizes the interstate transport of wildlife taken in violation of state law, and also separately criminalizes false labeling of wildlife in commerce, which is exactly what every one of those falsified FWC disposition reports amounted to. Underneath the Lacey Act counts were Endangered Species Act violations under 16 U.S.C., Section 1538, Migratory Bird Treaty Act violations, conspiracy, wire fraud for the use of interstate electronic payments in the scheme, and tax evasion for the $284,000 in unreported income. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission had moved faster. On December 19th, 5 days after the search warrant, the FWC commenced administrative permit revocation proceedings. The Class 3 rehabilitation permit was suspended on an emergency basis the same day. The USDA APHIS captive wildlife exhibitor license was suspended a week later. Heart of Florida Wildlife Rehab, as a legal operating entity, ceased to exist before the federal indictment was even filed. He pleaded not guilty at the initial appearance. The not guilty plea, his defense attorney would later concede in plea discussions, was procedural. By the time he sat down across from the Assistant United States Attorney in early summer 2025, the conversation was not about whether he had done it. It was about how many other names he could give. The federal sentencing guidelines, calculated on the dollar value of the wildlife, the number of specimens, the involvement of federally listed species, the use of interstate wires, and the abuse of a position of trust, put his exposure in the range of 41 to 63 months. The trust enhancement under Section 3B1.3 of the guidelines, the one for defendants who used a position of public or private trust to commit or facilitate the offense, was the part that hit hardest. He had been issued the permit precisely because the state of Florida trusted him to do exactly the opposite of what he had spent 4 years doing. Federal prosecutors made it clear they intended to argue the enhancement at sentencing. The restitution figure being negotiated as of late summer was structured in 2 pieces. The first was monetary, the $284,000 in proceeds, plus disgorgement of the appreciated value of the Toyota Tundra and the facility improvements purchased with illicit funds. The second was something rarely seen in these cases, forfeiture of the 12-acre Lake Wales property itself, on the theory that the rehabilitation facility had been an instrumentality of the underlying Lacey Act offenses. The forfeiture, if it went through, would mean the family lost both the business and the home in the same proceeding. The victim impact framing was, by necessity, institutional rather than personal. There was no human victim in the conventional sense, no defrauded retiree, no exploited patient. The victim in the government's filings was the wildlife itself, the regulatory system, and the public trust in permitted conservation work. A senior USFWS special agent in charge, in a written statement filed with the sentencing memorandum, put it this way: the defendant did not merely steal animals from the public trust. He used the public trust as the tool that allowed the theft. Every permitted rehabilitator in the country operates inside a regulatory architecture that requires the agency to trust the permit holder's word. When that word turns out to be sold to the highest bidder at a roadside Cracker Barrel, the architecture itself is damaged. Future animals will pay for that damage in tighter regulation, in audit burdens absorbed by honest rehabilitators, and in the diminished standing of legitimate conservation work in the public eye. The FWC, in a January 2025 enforcement briefing, cited the case publicly as the central example in what the agency began calling trusted intermediary trafficking, the use of a legitimate permit as both the source of and the cover for an illegal trade. By spring 2025, the Commission had announced a structural review of permit renewal protocols statewide. The proposed reforms included unannounced facility audits at any time during the permit period, biometric tagging, including pit tags with cross-referenced satellite confirmation, of all rehabilitation specimens of federally listed species, and mandatory video documentation of every release event for ESA-listed animals, with files retained by the agency rather than the permit holder. The broader rehabilitation community in Central Florida absorbed the cost. Permit holders who had spent careers doing the work properly suddenly faced the audit burden of operators they had never met. A woman who had run a small songbird rehabilitation operation in Hardy County for 18 years told a reporter for the Tampa Bay Times that she had nearly closed her facility after the new audit protocols were announced. Not because she had anything to hide, but because the administrative load on a one-woman operation had become more than she could sustain. "He cost all of us," she said. "He cost the animals most, but he cost all of us too." As of the most recent docket filing, the case is in active plea negotiation. The expected outcome, per filings on both sides, is a guilty plea to the lead Lacey Act counts plus tax evasion, with the remaining counts dismissed in exchange for substantial cooperation against the buyer network identified in the Signal correspondence. The Federal Bureau of Prisons placement is expected to be a low-security facility, most likely FCI Coleman Low in Sumter County, Florida, about 90 minutes north of the property he no longer owns. He will serve, after good time credit, somewhere between 34 and 53 months. He will be released in his late 40s. He will not hold another wildlife permit in the United States for the rest of his life. The $284,000 is gone. The Toyota Tundra is gone. The 2 private school enrollments are gone. Both kids were back in Polk County Public Schools by the end of the spring 2025 semester. The Instagram account, A Heart of Florida Wildlife, was deactivated by Meta in February 2025 at the request of federal investigators. The 187,000 followers, the viral release videos, the FWC commendation, the Tampa Bay Times profile, the school visits, all of it now lives only in archived links and in the case file of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Florida. The ledger, the black 3-ring binder with 87 handwritten entries that contradicted the corresponding state reports, is filed as Government Exhibit 14 in the docket. It is the most damaging piece of evidence against him, and he wrote every word of it himself in his own home office, knowing exactly what it said. This case was quiet, but the case on the right-hand side is louder, uglier, and somehow worse. Click it now.